So here's what we have. Now this is the original photo. As you can see over here on the right side, I have the original layer as a duplicate on top of all of these other layers here. Now all of these layers are the layers that I used to modify the existing image. So on top, the topmost layer is my original, and everything underneath is what is used to create the rest of it. And the reason why I do this is because if I hide the topmost layer, it gives me a quick and easy way to look at a before and after of the image. Now you'll notice, again, as mentioned before, this tutorial is focused entirely on photo editing and eye. So here's the original eye, and here is what the final eye looked like. As you can see, I changed the shape of the eye and drastically changed the colors. Beyond this, I also have it set up to where I can actually add color to the eye if I want, and easily change this however I want beyond just being green and brown, and we'll get into that in more detail in a little bit. Okay, so now we are back to the beginning. As you can see, I only have one layer. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the shape of the eye. Now you remember earlier I made the eye appear a little bit more round and a little bit bigger. Now of course this is not a necessary step. More than anything, I'm just going to show you this because I personally really like to exaggerate features whenever I'm doing my photo editing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the background layer and I'm going to duplicate the layer. And the reason why is because you always want to have an original copy somewhere in your image, just because if something goes wrong, you can always have that to fall back on. So now we have the background copy and the background layer. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and hide the background layer. So I pretty much just have the copy to work with. So I'm going to click on Filters, Enhance, or I'm sorry, Distorts. Yeah, Filters, Distorts, and click Eye Warp. Now the Eye Warp tool is a very interesting tool. If you've ever worked with Photoshop, there's a tool called Liquify, and this essentially does the same thing. Before I get started using it, I'm going to go ahead and make my window a little bit bigger so that my preview is much bigger. And then I'm just going to click somewhere to make it update the change. So now I have a nice preview of this image. Now what iWarp does, it lets you deform the shape of your photo in a very cool way. There's several different tools. There's Move, Grow, Swirl, Remove, Shrink, and Swirl counterclockwise as well as clockwise. So if you click on Shrink, it'll actually, you can see it kind of warps the image a little bit. If I make this radius bigger, it's actually going to really shrink, and you can get some pretty weird effects. You know, you click Grow, and it's going to, you know, push. It just pushes the photo. Swirl will do what it suggests, and Move will just grab it and pull it. So what we're going to work with is we're going to work with Grow. We're going to turn the deform radius down, and we're going to turn the deform amount down a little bit too, just so that it doesn't affect it. And it doesn't take much. I mean, it's like a click, and it's going to be, as you can see, that's already way too much. So just click Reset and try again, and just keep working on it. Adjust your radius a little bigger, you know, and see what you can work with. Again, it doesn't take a lot. Click on the Move tool and maybe try pulling it around a little bit, grow it a little more, and just try to remember that the shape of your eye should end up being fairly round. So if you end up with this goofy shape, there's a good reason why. So I kind of like that, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And the last thing I like to do is I like to click on Unhide my background and then Hide and Show to see the difference in shape, to see if I like it. And now that I'm looking at the before and after, I don't really like my result. So I'm going to go ahead and click Edit, Undo, and just continue to undo until I'm back to where both layers look normal. And then I'm just going to essentially try again, and continue to try to do this until I'm happy with the shape of my eye. So here's the shape that I ended up with. If you look at the before and the after, it's subtle, but still quite substantial. So now that I have the shape of my eye nailed down, I'm going to go ahead and start working on making this eye brighter. And to do that, I'm going to use layers, layer modes, and layer masks. The first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new layer by right-clicking on my background copy and clicking New Layer. And then I'm just going to leave it on transparency and click on my bucket tool and fill it with the color white. So again, I clicked on my bucket and then I clicked on these arrows and it switches between the foreground and background color, and I just filled it in with the color white. You could have alternatively just clicked on the color black, dragged it over to white, and filled it in. Regardless, we now have an all white image. I'm going to click mode and set my layer mode to overlay. And what you'll see is it has made the entire image brighter. Now, if I zoom into my eye and I right click on my layer and I add a layer mask and set the layer mask to black full transparency and click add, what it's going to do is that layer mask is now going to hide everything that was once visible on this image. As always, I highly recommend that you check out my layer mask tutorial. I will add the link below if you haven't already seen it, and I also recommend that you check out my layer mode tutorial if you haven't seen it. Both of those lessons will really help you understand exactly what's going on here. So now that we have our layer mask in place and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and click on my paintbrush tool and set my paintbrush to a soft brush. And if you don't know what a soft brush is, it's pretty much a fuzzy or a blurry brush. So we'll go ahead and click on this brush here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Wacom tablet and I'm going to brush the color white on this eye. So with my tablet, I'm just going to brush in the color white in this area, right around on the iris, because what we're doing right now is we're working to make her eye brighter. So now, as you can see, that made a pretty big difference on the eye right away. Now this is kind of right along the same track on what I was talking about in the text above regarding the eye just looks fake. To me, it just doesn't look real. It looks too bright. It looks alien, almost like an alien. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take my background layer and move it above everything else. And the reason why is, again, I really like being able to keep myself grounded by looking at the original photo and the final photo just to see how drastic my changes are. Because again, this is photo editing, and a good photo, a photo that's edited properly, especially when you're talking about portraits, is a photo that nobody even realizes is edited. You know, if I can look at a photo, and especially, you know, you're going to come onto this too, as you learn more and more about photo editing and stuff like that, it's going to drive you crazy whenever you see these bad edit jobs. So again, keep yourself grounded, have your original image on top at all times so that you can constantly keep yourself in check and see where you're at. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my paintbrush tool, and this time I'm going to switch back over to the color black, and I'm going to make the size of my brush a little bit bigger. And I'm just going to kind of fade. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. I'm going to click on my layer mask, and I'm going to kind of fade some of that outer edge away a little. Just a little bit, not a lot. Just to kind of make it blend a little nicer. And then I'll go ahead and adjust this opacity down to where it's a much more subtle result. And you know, we'll be able to tweak this opacity up and down as we continue on, but for now I'm going to try to keep it to be a fairly small amount, and you'll see why in a second. So now we're going to add a new layer, and what we're going to do this time is we're going to add a little more detail to her eye. And what I mean by that is sometimes whenever you look at an eye, you can kind of almost see lines in the iris, and we're going to try to create those using Gimp. So go ahead and just right click on your layer and click New Layer, and this time we'll go ahead and just set the layer fill type to white. So now we just have a layer completely filled in the color white, and again we're going to set the layer mode to overlay. And then we're going to right click on that layer, and we're going to add another layer mask. We're going to set it to black full transparency and click add. So now again we have a layer that's entirely invisible, and all we have to do is paint on the color white, and it's going to brighten portions of the image based on what we paint. Now here's where things get kind of interesting, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a zoom blur, and I'm going to add noise to our layer mask to kind of create those streaks for me. This effect was also done in my Sunray tutorial, so I'll go ahead and link that below so you can kind of see another use for this effect. So right click on your layer and click show layer mask, because we want to see this mask. It'll help us a lot. So then click filters, noise, RGB noise, and just set the gray somewhere in the middle, maybe 1/2, and click OK. What it'll do is it's going to add random pixels of white, gray, and black into this image. So then just click filters, blur, motion blur, and what we're going to do is we're going to set the motion blur to zoom, and I'm going to hide this layer for a moment so I can kind of figure out the location with which we want the center of our zoom blur to go, because you'll see you can actually set the blur center, and we want the center of the blur to be dead smack in the middle of this eye. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mouse and I'm going to hover over the center of the eye, and then I'm going to look down here in the bottom left hand corner, and it's going to give me the coordinates that I need. So the coordinates are 1258 by 935. So I'm just going to type in 1258, 935. And now all of a sudden our blur is going to be dead smack in the middle of our eye. We're going to crank up the length until we find something that we like. About that much maybe. And then we'll just click OK. Now this is going to take some time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. Just let your computer think, and whenever it's done, get ready for the next step. Alright, so my blur effect is now done, so let's go ahead and see the result. Go ahead and click on your eyeball, and what you're going to see is the zoom blur effect has gone straight from the middle of your eye outward, which is exactly what we wanted. So if we right click on this, and we're going to uncheck the show layer mask button, and what you'll notice, if I zoom out, you can see there are very faint streaks all around the image, and that's because the white from these streaks is creating this really intricate layer mask. But the problem is it didn't quite, it gave us the streaks in our eye, but they're not quite strong enough. They're still pretty faint, and I want them to be more exaggerated. So to do that, I'm going to right click on my layer mask and click show layer mask again so I can clearly see what's going on. And I'm going to click colors, and let's try this. Let's try doing an unsharp mask. Filters, enhance, unsharp mask. And go to the center of your eye, because that's the only part that really matters. And turn up the radius and turn up the amount, and just see what you can come up with. See, that's probably quite a bit better. Let's see what that does. So now we have a much sharper image, much more white, much more black. So now whenever I uncheck this, you're going to notice these streaks are a lot more apparent, which is good because we want that. So now we've got some pretty interesting things going on inside of our eye that'll really help us create an exciting eye. So let's go ahead and click on the lasso tool, the free select tool, lasso, and I'm just going to kind of draw a rough circle around the eye. And what I just did was I selected the eye, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to remove all of these extra streaks everywhere except for near this eye. And to do that, I went ahead and I selected the eye, and now I'm going to click select invert. And what that will do is now instead of having this small area of the eye selected, it selected everything but the eye. So now if I click on my bucket tool and I fill it in with the color black, you'll notice all of those streaks are going to go away, as long as, oh yes, you also have to make sure that you set your fill affected area to fill whole selection. So again, once I click on this, all those streaks except for the ones near the eye are going to disappear. So there you go. So now click select none, and then zoom back in to the eye, and you'll see you still have those streaks there. So we'll get out our Wacom tablet and drop the scale down a little and just kind of start roughing in those details around the edge. And then maybe make the size a little smaller and get those pixels out of the center of the eye. And we now have a very cool pattern on our eye. Now of course, it's way too strong. So if we turn our opacity down, you'll notice that it'll give us the ability to control just how much that's really affecting the look. You can turn this down almost nothing. But we'll fine-tune everything in the end whenever we have everything in place. The goal now is just to try to create the layers and create the structure with which we can make those tweaks. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a black rim along the outer portion of this iris to help exaggerate the iris, to help it pop out. And you can see that this eye actually already has one a little bit, but we're gonna pull that out a little more because I really like that feature of eyes. So let's right click on our layer and we're gonna click new layer, set the layer to transparency, click OK, set my colors back to normal, click on my paintbrush, or I'm sorry, my bucket fill tool, fill this layer with the color black, set the layer mode to overlay, right click on that layer, click add layer mask, and set the layer mask to black full transparency. So everything we just did is literally exactly what we've been doing before. The only difference is instead of filling our layer with white, which makes the layers lighter, we filled it with black, which makes the image darker. So now if I grab my paintbrush tool, and as mentioned earlier, I'm using a Wacom tablet, very, very helpful. Highly recommend that you look into getting one. Actually, before I use that brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the ellipse select tool, and I'm going to try to roughly create the shape of our iris. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if you look, the outer edge of the circle is relatively sharp, whereas the inner portion is actually kind of blurry. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this selection to help us create a nice hard edge on the outer rim of the eye, but we're going to use a soft brush so that the inner edge is soft. Think of it like taking a paintbrush and trying to paint along a ruler. It gives you the opportunity to create this really dynamic edge on one side, but the other side is going to be a very hard edge because the ruler is keeping the paint from going beyond the ruler. So that is a pretty good selection of my eye. Let's tweak it a little further. And whenever you have it, you hit enter and it will commit that selection. So now get your tablet out and use a soft brush, make it a little bit bigger, and just kind of paint in that outer edge of that eye. And then click select none after you make that paint. And you'll notice now that we have a pretty dark eye, and some of it actually spilled over into the bottom eyelid, which we don't want. So let's go ahead and switch our color over to the color black, make our brush a little bit smaller, and just paint that detail away. Short brush strokes are highly recommended at this point because if you make a mistake, you can just undo that last stroke instead of the entire brush. Okay, so that looks pretty good. It's a little too strong, but that's okay. We can tweak that with the opacity in the layer, and that's the intent. So as you can see, that actually makes a pretty big difference. Actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and scale my brush up a little bit, color in the color black, and just kind of get rid of just a little bit of that. Just take that edge off just a little bit. Make it a little thinner. There we go. That looks a little better, I think. Yeah, that's a little more subtle. Okay. And then as mentioned, you can adjust the opacity down, and that'll give you a pretty real looking edge. Okay, so now our iris is pretty well done. We might add a little bit more to kind of, we might tweak it a little more later on, but for now, the general look of the iris is pretty well there, except for, of course, the color, which we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, I want to change the white of the eye. Now, this eye is a very nice eye. Sometimes you run into people who have pretty bloodshot eyes, and the issue with that is it just doesn't look very good. To fix it, though, all you have to do is create another layer and set the layer mode to saturation. So right click, click new layer, set the layer fill type to white this time, and click OK. Now set the layer mode to saturation. What saturation is going to do is it's going to remove all color from the image because white has no saturation. So now what we can do is, if you had really bloodshot eyes, now all of a sudden your eye is gray. So if you right click on this and you click add layer mask, set the layer mask to black, and click add, you can now selectively choose what part of this eye has color or doesn't have color, just by simply coloring in the color white on your layer mask. And again, on this specific image, this is not going to really make a difference because her eye is in really good shape. So just, click on your Wacom tablet with your Wacom tablet and just switch between the color white and the color black by hitting the X key on your keyboard and just kind of rough in that general color. Now if I turn the layer off and on, you'll notice there's a pretty substantial difference. Much more substantial if she had red eyes though. So now I'll just adjust the opacity down until it looks, to me, fairly real. And so I'll hide this layer and show it. Again, it's almost impossible to even notice a difference with this eye. But I did want to show this to you because there will be a time where you're going to be photo editing an eye and the eye is going to be completely red, and this is going to make a huge difference. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lighten the white of the eye, and to do that I'm going to just simply right click on the layer we just created and click duplicate layer because I want the same exact layer mask, the same exact color and everything. And I'm going to just simply change the layer mode to overlay. So now I have this layer that controls how light or dark the white of my eye is. I'm going to zoom out, hide it, show it. You can see a pretty big difference. You got to be careful with this because this is, especially with the contrast with the black and the outside of this edge, it's pretty easy to overdo it. But that's okay because, again, you can adjust the opacity on all of these layers at any point and just really fine tune it until it looks really good. So now we pretty much have our eye finished, except for the color of the iris. So I'm going to show you how you can optionally change that color. Now the interesting thing about working with the color of an eye is that it's in fact quite easy to do, but you really don't want to work on adjusting the color of your eye until you have the brightness and the general look of everything else that we just did in place. So what you're going to do now is you're going to right click on your background copy layer and click new layer because I want my color layer to be underneath of everything else. And honestly, I don't know if it makes a difference. It probably doesn't, but this is what I do. Now, right now, I'm going to first show you how to create a single color eye, and then I'm going to also show you how to do a dual color eye, because a lot of hazel eyes have that brown splash in the middle with the green splash on the outside, or blue even, or something like that. And I'm going to show you how you can really use these colors and also combine that with the zoom blur effect that we did earlier to really create some dynamic and colorful eyes. But first we're going to show you how to do a simple color change. And to do that, all you have to do is just create a new layer, set the layer mode to color, and pick a color. we're gonna we'll try green for the first one, and try to think of lifelike colors. So you're gonna go with a fairly dull, fairly non-saturated color, kind of like that, and click OK. Click on your bucket tool and fill this whole layer with that color. Now just right click on the layer, click Add Layer Mask, set the layer to black full transparency and click Add. And then reset your colors and get your tablet out, set your color to white, and just brush the color white in to add that green color on the eye. And just again, I'm just using a soft brush on this layer mask, and I'm just switching between the colors black and white and just really fine-tuning it and getting it in. And just like that, I now have a green eye. As you can see, it's way too bright. The color I chose was too much. So to make that look more realistic, let's go ahead and click on our color that we had before and drop down on the brightness. Click OK. Simply fill in that color with a new color, and you'll see it's getting closer. And just continue to tweak that color until the eye looks realistic. Okay, so to create a dual tone, it's a little bit more involved, but not as much as you may think. For now, I'm going to go ahead and hide this green eye color that I created and create a new layer. So I'm going to right click and click New Layer, set the layer mode to transparency, click OK. And then I'm going to fill this layer with a brown hue because I'm going to create hazel eyes. And just go kind of down in the darker areas and click OK. Fill this layer, set the layer mode to color, and then right click on that layer and click Add Layer Mask, set it to black full transparency and click Add. Click on your reset colors, and now what we're going to do is we're going to create a gradient, a radial shaped gradient that goes from the color white to the color black, or in this case foreground to background. And we're going to set the shape to radial, and what this is going to do is it's going to create, if I right click on my layer mask and I click Show Layer Mask, you'll be able to clearly see that whenever I create this, it's going to, oops, I did it backwards, set your layers to white and then black and create a radial gradient. And you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm just creating this slow fade from one color to the next, from white to black. If I right click and I uncheck Show Layer Mask, what you're going to see is that I am now, with this gradient, able to create this fade from one color onto the next, because that's what the gradient does. You know, and just continue to tweak it until you get a shape that you like. And what's cool is, like right here, this looks pretty good, but I think the outer edge is still a little too brown, but I can adjust the opacity down, and all of a sudden that part that I thought was too brown looks pretty well on spot. Well, maybe not, but sometimes that works. So let's set our opacity back and just continue to trial and error until you get a color that you like. See, that looks pretty good. Now the problem is now the center of our eye, that this little shine is this brownish color instead of the color it should be. So what we need to do is we need to actually mask off the pupil, even though you can't really tell. So go ahead and get your tablet, click on the brush tool, set the color to black, use a soft brush, and just brush away that information in the middle. And then, if you can, try to recover that. There you go. So if we zoom out again, there's the before and the after. So that's the top color. Now here's the cool thing. I'm going to re-show that green layer that I created earlier, and you can see that with that I'm now having that two-tone color that I was talking about earlier with the color green. Convincing as can be. You know, here's where we started and here's where we're at now. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you is how to create some more other dynamic ways to create some interesting things with an eye. Last but not least is this light and dark splash effect that we had created on this eye earlier using the zoom blur tool. We can actually take that effect and we can use it to do a color instead of a lightness change. So instead of setting this layer mode to overlay, essentially we're just going to set it to color. But first I'm going to duplicate the layer, that way I have it in case I change my mind later. I'm going to move the duplicated layer down so that it's in between the brown and the green. I don't honestly know if that's a necessary step, but I do it anyway. And now I'm going to fill my layer. Instead of the color white, I'm going to fill it with that same brown color that I used for the eyes before. And for now, I'm going to hide my overlay layer. And as you can see, just like that, we now have this dynamic. Oh wait, change the layer mode to color first. This eye with these interesting stripes and interesting patterns in it. Now, of course, I really like what this overlay layer does, but I don't like how it looks whenever I combine it with the color layer with the same mask. So to change that a little bit, first off, I'm going to, instead of make the eye get lighter in those areas, I'm going to make it get darker in those areas. So I'm going to click on the overlay layer that I created before that's creating those interesting streaks, and I'm going to fill it with the color black. And as you can see, instead of it making everything lighter, it made it all darker. So now we've got this really cool looking result with our eye. And just to help a little bit, we'll go ahead and click Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to blur the layer mask that we're using to create this effect just a little bit, just to kind of take that edge off. And we'll just go ahead and set it to like 2 or 3 pixels, a really small amount, and just click OK. So now, I think that was too much. Let's do the Gaussian blur again. See what we can get. Let's make it 2 instead. Yeah, see, that's kind of good. So that's what we ended up with. And the cool thing is you can always hide and show and change these layers around until you get the final result that you really like. Like for example, this iris. I don't know if I like the whole iris being light or if I just want to try to exaggerate the center portion. To change that, I'll just click on my brush tool and get out my tablet. Make the size a little bit bigger, again using a soft brush. And just kind of click in the middle, just to kind of take some of that edge off of the inner portion of the eye. And whenever I do that, I can get away with turning the opacity up a little bit to kind of create this more interesting color, and kind of gives the eye a little bit more, I don't know, it makes it more interesting, I guess. But that's pretty much it. At that point now, you have the control to change all these different parts of the layer on, your own free will. I now have control of every part of this woman's eye. I can change anything. If I want, the white of her eye to be brighter, I can make it pretty bright just by adjusting these sliders. And what you do is you just go through, you adjust these sliders, you tweak the layer masks, and you just really massage it in until you get this final eye that you're really happy with. If you put some time into it and you put some effort into it, you're going to get a result that you're really, really happy with that looks really convincing. So I hope this helps. If you guys have any questions, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Thanks!